My name is Marcus James Mitchell. I'm 36 years old now, and I'm telling you this story not because I'm proud of how it ended, but because I'm finally ready to tell it the way it actually happened, not the way I wanted it to happen, not the way I tell it to friends at bars when I'm drinking, but the real version, the one with the parts that don't make me look good. It starts in 1988, the year I was born, but you can't understand 2019 without understanding 1981, which is when my father first decided that business was more important than breath. My father's name was Richard James Mitchell. He was born in Toledo, Ohio, in 1947 to a factory foreman and a nurse. His father, my grandfather, whom I never met, was a quiet man who drank beer on Sundays and read the newspaper cover to cover every morning before work. My grandmother was practical in the way that some women of her generation were. She didn't ask for much because she'd learned early that asking for things was a luxury reserved for people who had options. Richard Mitchell was a different kind of quiet than his father. His father's silence came from acceptance. Richard's silence was calculation. He would sit at the dinner table, listening to his parents talk about the factory, about neighborhood gossip, about the priests at church, and he would say nothing. But you could see it in his eyes, the measuring, the assessing, the constant evaluation of everything as a transaction. By the time he was 23, he'd finished his business degree and worked his way into an entry-level position at a mid-size logistics company called Midwest Transport. By 28, he was a manager. By 32, he was a director. By 35, he'd convinced the ownership to let him attempt a business model that had never been attempted in the Midwest, real-time shipment tracking using computers. This was 1982. Computers were still a novelty. The idea that you could know where a package was at any moment, not just when it arrived or failed to arrive, seemed like science fiction to most people. But my father understood something that most people didn't. People didn't want better service. They wanted control. They wanted the illusion that they could see what was coming, that they could prepare, that they weren't at the mercy of systems they couldn't see. The computer tracking system worked. Midwest Transport's business exploded. And my father, understanding that the success belonged to him and not to the company, left and started his own logistics company in 1985. He called it Mitchell Logistics. By the time I was born, in 1988, my father was already legendary, at least in certain circles. He'd grown Mitchell Logistics from a two-person operation in a strip mall to a company with 43 employees, contracts with 6 major retailers, and revenue that exceeded $3 million annually. My mother's name was Catherine Marie Yates before she married him. She came from money, not enormous wealth, but comfortable, old money comfort. Her father was a banker. Her mother was a philanthropist. She was raised to be gracious, to understand the importance of appearance, to know how to manage a household like it was a small corporation, which in many ways, it was. Catherine was beautiful in that effortless way that some women are when they're young and have never had to worry about money. She had dark hair that she wore long, hazel eyes that seemed to find humor in situations that I, as a child, didn't understand were funny. She had a laugh that traveled through a room like something you could follow, something you could get lost in. She met my father at a banker's dinner in 1979. He was there as the guest of a business associate. She was there because it was expected of her. The story she told later was that he was the only person at the entire event who hadn't asked her father any questions about banking. Instead, he'd asked her about a book she was carrying, some novel I can't remember the name of now. They dated for 2 years. My father proposed on New Year's Eve, 1981, at a hotel restaurant in Columbus. According to my mother, he didn't make a speech. He simply put the ring on the table, looked at her, and said, "I'm going to build something." I need someone who won't try to stop me. She said yes. They married in 1982, and my sister Sarah was born in 1981, which, if you do the math, means my mother was pregnant before they were married. This was never discussed in our family. It simply existed as a fact that everyone knew and nobody mentioned. Sarah spent her first years in a small house in Dublin, Ohio, while my father worked 16-hour days getting Mitchell Logistics off the ground. My mother, pregnant with me while managing a toddler and a husband whose ambition was consuming him like a fire consuming oxygen, learned how to make a life inside the margins of another person's obsession. I was born on March 14, 1988. The first thing my father did when he found out I was a boy was call his lawyer. The second thing he did was return to the office. My mother told me this story once, and I never forgot it. She said it the way you'd tell a story about someone else's father, not hers, with a kind of detached observation, like she was narrating a documentary about a man she'd once known. My first memories are not of my father. They are of my mother, of the kitchen in the house on Elm Street, of afternoon light filtering through white curtains, of her hands always moving, always doing something, always occupied with the business of maintaining a life. Sarah was 7 when I was born. 7 is old enough to know disappointment. 7 is old enough to understand that the new baby is not a gift but a complication. 7 is old enough to know that your father is excited about something, and it isn't you. But Sarah learned to love me anyway. This is one of the few generous things I remember my sister doing without calculation, without measuring what she would get in return. When I was a baby, she would sit next to my crib and tell me stories. I remember her voice more than the stories, high and animated, performing for an audience of one. She was performing for me, but she was also performing for our mother, trying to show that she could be trusted with this new thing, that she could be responsible, that she was mature enough to be the good older sister. I think this was the moment she began becoming who she would become, always aware of how her actions appeared to others, always measuring her worth by the reactions she received. My father built Mitchell Logistics with the same precision that some men use to build cathedrals, but unlike cathedrals, which are built to inspire devotion to something transcendent, Mitchell Logistics was built to inspire devotion to itself, and through itself, to the man who'd created it. By 1992, when I was 4 and Sarah was 11, Mitchell Logistics had offices in 6 cities. By 1995, when I was 7, we'd moved into a house that was genuinely large, not obscene, but substantial. It was a Tudor-style house with 6 bedrooms, a library, a solarium, and a driveway that curved. This is where my childhood really begins, in that house, which was beautiful in the way that houses are beautiful when they're designed for a certain kind of life, and we were all trying very hard to live that life correctly. My father had an office in the house. It was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a hallway, with a door that closed. He would go in there after dinner and not emerge until morning. Sometimes I would pass the office late at night. I had a habit of waking up thirsty, of padding down the hallway in my bare feet toward the kitchen, and I would see light under the door. I never opened it. It didn't occur to me to open it. That door was a barrier that understood itself. It had the authority of a locked gate. My mother managed the house with the efficiency of someone managing a mid-size business. She had a housekeeper, a gardener, and a woman who came twice a week to handle the laundry. But despite this, she was always busy, always supervising, always checking, always making sure that everything maintained the appearance of effortless grace that large houses require. Sarah went to a private school called Lakeside Academy. It was expensive and competitive and designed to turn 11-year-old girls into 25-year-old woman executives. Sarah was the kind of student who belonged there. She was smart in that particular way that schools like Lakeside rewarded, She was strategic about when to volunteer in class, she knew how to present herself, she understood that education was not about learning but about positioning. I went to Lakeside too, when I was old enough, but I was never comfortable there. I didn't understand the game. I didn't see school as a long-term investment in social position. I saw it as a place where I was supposed to learn things. This made me fundamentally misaligned with the institution. But Sarah loved it. She thrived. By the time she was 15, she was the president of 3 clubs, the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, and the clear heir apparent to a student government position that wouldn't exist for another year because the school would create it specifically for her to run. My mother attended all of Sarah's events. She would sit in the audience at recitals and plays and academic competitions, and her face would have a look of such fierce pride that it seemed like she might burst. When Sarah won something, which was often, my mother would cry. Happy tears, proud tears, the tears of someone who had invested everything in another person and was finally seeing returns. I remember sitting next to my mother at one of these events. I think it was a debate competition, though I'm not entirely certain, and I remember the feeling of being invisible. Not angry invisible. Not resentful invisible. Just the natural invisibility of being the younger sibling of someone who was exceptional. My father, to his credit, came to some of Sarah's events. I remember him sitting in an audience, stone-faced, watching our sister articulate some argument about water rights or congressional procedure or whatever the debate topic was that year. And when she won, he would nod. Just nod. He would stand and clap appropriately, but there was something in his face that suggested he'd never doubted that she would win, that her victory was simply the natural outcome of his genetic contribution. I don't think he ever came to anything of mine. This is not an accusation. It's just a fact that I've had 30 years to process, and I've mostly processed it into acceptance. He was working. He was building. He didn't have time for my school events. And I was, in some fundamental way, not the kind of son who would inspire him to find that time. By the time Sarah was 17, it was clear that she would go into business. There was no other option that she or our father ever discussed. Not medicine, not law, not academia. Business. Something that could be measured, quantified, grown. She applied to 3 universities, Harvard, Yale, and Duke. She was accepted to all 3. She chose Yale because, she said, Yale understood that business was about people, and Harvard was for people who thought business was about numbers. This was a very Sarah thing to say. It suggested sophistication without actually saying anything substantive. But it impressed people, which was all it needed to do. My father took her to campus for orientation. Just him and Sarah. My mother stayed home. I stayed home. It was a father-daughter trip, a rite of passage, a moment that seemed to seal something that had been true all along. Sarah was the child who mattered. I was 14 when Sarah left for Yale. I remember the day she packed her car, a Volvo that our father had given her for high school graduation. It was a practical car, the kind of car that a teenager who would go to Yale would drive. Not showy. Expensive in an understated way. My mother helped her pack. I watched from Sarah's bedroom doorway, which had become something of a sanctuary for me, a place where I could observe the rituals of a family that seemed to operate according to rules I didn't fully understand. "You're going to do wonderful things," my mother said, folding a sweater. "You know that, right? You're going to go to Yale, and you're going to do wonderful things." "I hope so," Sarah said. And she meant it. There was no false modesty in her voice. There was just the simple confidence of someone who had been told repeatedly that she was special and had eventually come to believe it. My mother hugged her for a long time. The kind of hug that contains a whole relationship, all the invested hope, all the pride, all the love that had been poured into making Sarah who she was. When they separated, my mother was crying. My father drove her to New Haven. He came back 3 days later without Sarah. He didn't mention the trip. I remember him sitting at the dinner table that evening, eating my mother's cooking, and asking about the business, about work, about everything except the daughter he'd just left at Yale. When I started high school, it was clear that I would not be a Sarah. Not because I wasn't smart enough, though there was probably some element of that, but because I was fundamentally disinterested in the game that Sarah had mastered. I did well in school. I got good grades. But I didn't join clubs. I didn't run for student government. I didn't cultivate relationships with teachers or build resumes or do any of the dozens of subtle things that Lakeside Academy had been designed to teach us to do. Instead, I read books. I worked on cars in the garage with a man named William who'd worked for my father's company for years and had taken to mentoring me in the ways of engines and transmissions. I spent time at home, helping my mother with projects around the house, actually engaging with the work of maintaining a life rather than the performance of it. My father noticed this. I could tell he noticed because he said to my mother, once, when he thought I wasn't listening, "The boy is going to be a disappointment." I don't think he meant it cruelly. I think he meant it as a simple prediction, the way someone might predict the weather. My mother defended me. "He's kind," she said. "He's thoughtful." "Those aren't marketable qualities," my father replied. This conversation shaped something in me. It took a formless anxiety, the anxiety of a teenager who doesn't quite fit, and gave it a specific form. I was disappointing. My existence was a disappointment. Not because I was bad or failing, but because I was not what was expected, and the expectation was the only currency that mattered in our family. Sarah, meanwhile, was thriving at Yale. She joined the debate club. She got involved with student government. She secured an internship at a consulting firm sophomore year. By junior year, she had a job offer from McKinsey. By senior year, she was applying to business schools, not because she needed one, McKinsey was enough, but because going to business school was what successful Yale undergraduates did. She chose Wharton. Top of her class, full ride. My father attended her graduation from Yale. I remember him coming home with a specific quality of satisfaction on his face, not pride, exactly, but something like the satisfaction of a carpenter who's completed a particularly difficult project. My mother died on March 18, 2019. She was 71 years old. She had a stroke at home in the kitchen, actually, where so much of her life had happened, where I had so many of my memories of her. I was at work that day. I was 40 at the time, though I just turned 40 a few days earlier, a birthday that my family had not acknowledged. I was delivering mail in my usual neighborhood, a part of Columbus that had become as familiar to me as my own apartment. I knew the houses, the people, the rhythms of the day. My phone rang. It was my father. This was unusual. We didn't call each other. We didn't have that kind of relationship. He called to impart information, not to connect. "Your mother has had a stroke," he said. "She's at Ohio State Medical Center. You need to come now." I left my mail truck with a coworker and drove to the hospital. It took me 20 minutes. Every minute felt like an hour, the way minutes do when your life is about to change and you're heading toward that change without knowing exactly what shape it will take. My father was in the waiting room when I arrived. He looked the same as he always looked, composed, controlled, like he was managing a business problem that happened to involve his wife's neurological system. "She's stable," he said. "It was a major stroke, left side of the brain. They're doing imaging now. They won't know the full extent of the damage until tomorrow. Can I see her? I asked. Not yet. Doctors are with her. We sat in the waiting room. I don't remember what we talked about. I remember the sensation of sitting next to my father for what might have been the first time in years as two people in equal crisis. We weren't equal, of course. He was the husband, the one whose life was being most directly altered. I was the son, the peripheral figure. But for a moment, we occupied the same space of fear and uncertainty. Sarah arrived 2 hours later. She was living in Philadelphia at that time, working at a consulting firm, still climbing the ladder that had been laid out for her since childhood. She'd been in a client meeting when my father called her. She'd left immediately, gotten in her car, driven 3 hours at speeds that probably violated several traffic laws. When she walked into the waiting room, she looked like she was in control of a situation. She was composed, efficient, already taking mental notes about what needed to happen next. "What are the doctors saying?" she asked, addressing my father. "It's early. They won't know the full extent until morning." "Okay. What's the protocol? What happens next?" My father explained the protocol. My sister took notes. She asked clarifying questions. She seemed to organize the crisis into something manageable through the simple act of information gathering. We waited. The hospital held us in its fluorescent limbo, not day, not night, just the strange timelessness of a place where people's lives change. Around midnight, a doctor came out and said we could see her. My mother was in a hospital bed in an ICU room. She was alive, which was something. She was also not alive in a way that was harder to articulate. She was present but not present, conscious but not conscious. She had tubes in her arms and a breathing assistance thing that made a rhythmic sound. The left side of her body didn't move. The right side moved fractionally, without direction or purpose. I remember standing at the foot of her bed and thinking that this was not my mother. My mother was the woman who moved with intention, who orchestrated the lives of other people through careful management of schedules and expectations and love. This thing in the bed was a body that resembled her, but my mother, the actual woman, was already gone. My father sat in a chair next to the bed. He held her hand. I remember being shocked by this. I had never seen him hold her hand. I had never seen him touch her with gentleness. But he sat there, holding her hand, and his face had the expression of someone who was finally, for the first time, engaged with his life. Sarah made phone calls. She called her boss. She explained that there was a family emergency. She outlined what was happening. She arranged to work remotely for the next week, then took a leave of absence. We stayed at the hospital in shifts. My father stayed at night. Sarah and I stayed during the day. We sat and waited for something that might not come, for some sign that the woman in the bed was still in there somewhere. On the third day, my mother had another stroke. The doctors called it a major event. She didn't wake up after that one. She stopped responding to stimuli. Her brain, the thing that had orchestrated her entire life, was shutting down room by room. The doctors gave us the options. We could keep her on life support indefinitely, or we could let her go. My father made the decision without consulting us. He said, "Let her go," and it was such a simple thing to say, but it contained everything: all the years of not understanding her, of taking her for granted, of letting her maintain the life that he had built while he was off building something else. My mother died on March 22, 2019. 5 days after the first stroke. I was holding her hand when she died. Sarah was in the waiting room. My father was standing at the window, looking out at Columbus in the spring, at a city that continued on as if nothing had happened. The doctors asked if we wanted to say goodbye. We said yes, but what we did was just stand there, looking at her body, understanding that the goodbye had happened a long time ago, maybe years ago, and we were just now catching up to that fact. My mother's funeral was on a Saturday in March. It rained. People came from all over, friends from college, neighbors, people she'd known from her volunteer work at the church and the library and the historical society. 132 people. I remember my father counting them, as if the number of people attending was some kind of metric of success. Sarah delivered a eulogy. She spoke about our mother's grace, her kindness, her dedication to her family. She spoke about how our mother had always been there, always present, always putting other people's needs before her own. Sarah cried during the eulogy, real tears, and everyone in the church cried with her. When it was over, my father shook hands with people. He accepted condolences. He arranged the reception. He moved through the motions of mourning with the efficiency he brought to everything else. I don't remember delivering a eulogy. I don't remember speaking at all. I remember standing in the church, listening to my sister describe a woman I recognized but didn't quite know, a version of my mother that had been simplified and elegized into something more admirable than the actual, complicated woman who had raised me. After the funeral, Sarah went back to Philadelphia. She'd taken a week off work. She'd used up her bereavement time. Life had to go on, and the machinery of her career had to keep moving. My father and I were left alone in the house. For 6 months after my mother's death, we inhabited that space together without really connecting. He worked. I worked. We ate dinner at different times. We didn't talk about our mother. We didn't talk about much of anything. He seemed to be waiting for something. I realize now that he was waiting for the thing that would happen next, the business matter, the practical issue, the next thing that needed to be managed. My mother's death was a crisis that had resolved itself into just another thing that had happened. He was ready to move on. But I wasn't ready. I was 31 years old and I was grieving my mother, which meant I was also grieving my father, because his grief had disappeared me in a way that made it very clear what I was worth in his economy of love. 6 months later, he died. My father had a heart attack at 6 in the morning on August 10, 2019. He was in his study, sitting at his desk, probably working on something related to Mitchell Logistics. The housekeeper found him when she came in at 7. She called 911. But he was already gone. When the general counsel of Mitchell Logistics called me to tell me that my father was dead, I think I already knew. There's something in the universe that announces death before it's confirmed. Some shift in the atmospheric pressure. Some change in the quality of light. I'm very sorry, the general counsel said. Your father was a remarkable man. We're going to miss him. I thought about saying something, but I couldn't think of anything to say, so I just said, thank you, and hung up. Sarah called me an hour later. Did you hear? She asked. Yeah. Where are you? Work. Can you take the rest of the day off? Yeah. I'm driving up from Philadelphia. I'll be there in 3 hours. We need to meet with his lawyer. We met with the lawyer, a man named Hendricks, who'd worked with my father for 30 years, on the following Monday. We sat in his office, which was exactly the kind of office a lawyer for a man like my father would have, expensive but not ostentatious, organized but lived in, the kind of space that communicated serious competence. Hendricks explained that my father had created a will in 1998, had updated it in 2003, had modified it again in 2015, and had left specific instructions for what should happen to his estate. Your father, Hendricks began, was very clear about his intentions. Okay, Sarah said. She had a notebook. She was already taking notes, already planning. The estate is valued at approximately $34 million. This includes the family home, valued at $2.1 million. It includes his personal investments, worth roughly $4 million. It includes his ownership stake in Mitchell Logistics. He paused. He had our attention. This was the part that mattered. Your father sold his company, Hendricks continued, 2 weeks ago. The sale was finalized on August 3rd. A private equity firm acquired Mitchell Logistics for $28 million. I felt something in my chest. Not surprise, exactly. I didn't know my father's financial situation intimately enough to be surprised. But something. Oh wait. The sale was structured such that the proceeds went into a trust, Hendricks explained. Sarah, you were the primary beneficiary of that trust. Your father was very specific about this. He wanted the company, which he'd spent 34 years building, which represented his life's work, to go to you. Sarah's face didn't change. She kept writing. For you, Marcus, he continued, turning to me, the estate was divided as follows. The family home will be liquidated. The proceeds, along with the personal investment portfolio, will be distributed 50-50 between you and your sister. That was roughly $3 million for each of us. Additionally, Hendricks said, there was a 5% bequest to the Methodist Church, which your paternal grandmother attended. So I get the company, Sarah said. She was still writing, but I could hear something in her voice, not triumph, exactly, but acknowledgement. And Marcus gets $3 million. Your father was very specific, Hendricks said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he'd had this conversation with my father, that my father had explained his reasoning, and that Hendricks had accepted it as logical. He felt that you, Sarah, had demonstrated a commitment to the business world. He felt that you were prepared to steward the company. For Marcus, he felt that the liquid assets were appropriate. Appropriate. What a word. What a way to describe being deemed less than by your own father, even after he was dead. What's the value of the company? I asked. $28 million, Hendricks said. That's the sale price. The company is no longer operational as an independent entity. The private equity firm that acquired it is integrating it into their larger logistics portfolio. But Sarah inherits the sale proceeds, I said. All of it? Yes, Hendricks confirmed. Your father was very clear about that. The meeting lasted another 45 minutes. We discussed details of the trust, timeline for distribution, tax implications, the logistics of liquidating the house. None of it mattered much. The essential thing had been said. My father had valued my sister $14 million more than me, and he had structured his death to make sure I understood that. When we left the lawyer's office, Sarah and I stood on the street outside the building. It was August, still summer, the air heavy and humid. I'm not taking it, Sarah said. What? The company. The money. I'm not taking it. I looked at her to see if she was serious. I could refuse it, she continued. I could tell Hendricks to redistribute my share. Why would you do that? Because Dad did this on purpose, she said. He wanted to hurt you. And I won't participate in that. I thought about this. It seemed like a kind thing to say. It seemed like the kind of thing my sister would say if she was trying to be a good person. But I didn't believe her. I didn't believe she wouldn't take the money. And I was right. Keep it, I said. You earned it, or he thought you did. That's all that matters. That's not true, Sarah said. That's not all that matters. But it was. We both knew it was. She was going to take the money, and I was going to accept the $3 million that Dad had deemed appropriate, and we were both going to move on with our lives, understanding on some fundamental level that our father had rated us and found me wanting. For 3 months after my father's death, I did very little. I went to work. I delivered mail. I came home. I didn't do much thinking about the $3 million that had materialized in my bank account. It seemed unreal, like a number on a statement that had nothing to do with actual life. Sarah, meanwhile, was doing something. She was doing a lot of somethings. She'd taken a leave of absence from her consulting firm. She was working with Hendricks on transferring the assets from the trust. She was talking to accountants and financial advisors. She was, in short, doing all the things you're supposed to do when you inherit $28 million. We talked on the phone a few times during those months. These were brief conversations, usually initiated by her, usually about practical matters. Hendricks says there are significant tax implications with the house sale, she said on one call. He recommends we consider selling it quickly rather than holding it. Okay, I said. The buyer's market is strong right now. He thinks we could get close to the asking price. You decide, I told her. You can make the decision. I want to know what you think. I think whatever you think is fine. She was quiet for a moment. That's not helpful, Marcus. I'm not trying to be helpful. I'm just tired. I was tired. Tired of grief, tired of the weight of the house, tired of the weight of my father's judgment reaching down from beyond death and touching my life. So I let Sarah make the decisions. She hired a real estate firm. She had the house appraised. She networked with her business contacts. Within 2 months, the house had been sold for $2.3 million, a surprisingly strong sale price. Sarah put that money in an account for me, handling the entire process without asking me to be involved. It's yours, she said when she called to tell me the sale had closed. Your $1.15 million from the house sale, plus your share of the investments, plus the inheritance. It all totals $3.2 million. You're free to do whatever you want with it. Thank you, I said. You don't have to thank me. It's your money. But it didn't feel like my money. It felt like money that had been assigned to me by people I wasn't sure I wanted to be associated with. It felt like the physical manifestation of not being enough. During this same 3-month period, Sarah was negotiating with the private equity firm that had acquired Mitchell Logistics. The sale of the company had been structured so that my father remained involved in an advisory capacity, which meant that his knowledge of the business's operations and client relationships was now valuable to the private equity firm. But my father was dead. So that knowledge died with him. Or it died partially. Sarah had worked at Mitchell Logistics for several summers during college. She had internships there. She understood the business in a way that I didn't, in a way that most people didn't. The private equity firm, called North Shore Capital, approached Sarah in September with a proposal. Would she consider joining their logistics division in an operational capacity? They were integrating Mitchell Logistics into a larger portfolio company, and they needed someone who understood the legacy business, someone who could help with continuity and client retention. They offered her $400,000 a year, plus equity options, plus the possibility of running the division within 2 years if she proved herself. Sarah accepted. She gave her consulting firm notice. She moved to Philadelphia, where North Shore Capital's main office was located, and started her new job in October 2019. I remember her telling me about this decision over the phone. It's not permanent, she said. I'm thinking of it as an interim role. Get the integration done, understand the business, then figure out what's next. It sounds like Dad would have wanted you to take this, I said. Probably, Sarah said. But I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it because it's interesting. And because the logistics space is going to be huge in the next decade, and this is a good position to be in. This was the Sarah I'd known my whole life, strategic, forward-thinking, already calculating 3 moves ahead. I'm glad, I said. I'm glad you're doing well. I'm not doing well, exactly, Sarah said. I'm just doing. Over the next several months, Sarah threw herself into her new role with characteristic intensity. She worked 60-hour weeks. She traveled to client sites. She immersed herself in the operations of the logistics business in a way that suggested she was trying to absorb my father through sheer force of will and work ethic. From her updates, delivered over periodic phone calls, I gathered that she was doing well. She was impressing people at North Shore. She was mastering the business quickly. She was positioning herself as someone indispensable, someone who understood what made Mitchell Logistics valuable. By March 2020, exactly 1 year after our mother's death, Sarah had secured a promotion. She was now the head of the logistics division. She was reporting to one of the managing partners at North Shore. She had a team of 30 people. She had an office with a view of Philadelphia. She called me to tell me about the promotion. That's incredible, I said, and I meant it. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my sister, she was genuinely impressive. She had taken the inheritance that our father had given her, not just the money, but the foundation of his approval, his belief in her potential, and she had built something with it. Thanks, she said. How are you doing? Fine. Work is fine. Apartment is fine. Just fine. Yeah, just fine. While Sarah was ascending the ranks of North Shore Capital, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus. It was a nice apartment. It had good light. It had hardwood floors and a kitchen that was bigger than a galley. It was, for me, sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was home. I'd gotten the apartment in 2011, when I was 23. At the time, it had seemed like a luxury, a place that was mine, that I'd selected, that didn't contain any of the architecture of my family's disappointments. I signed a lease for 1 year, then another, then another. 7 years passed. 8. 9. The apartment became the stable point in my life in a way that my family had never been. I knew the landlord. I knew my neighbors. I knew the order of the buildings on my mail route, the names of the people who received packages, the rhythms of the neighborhood seasons. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. I didn't have the kind of ambition that Sarah had. I didn't have the kind of drive that my father had. I was content with my life, which I think might have bothered people more than if I'd been struggling. Content is not a quality that American culture particularly values. Ambition is valued. Struggle is valued. But contentment is often read as stagnation. With the $3.2 million in the bank, I had options. I could have bought a house. I could have quit my job. I could have done something dramatic to mark the change in my circumstances. But I didn't. I kept working. I kept living in my apartment. I kept driving my 2004 Honda Civic. I donated some of the money to charity. I set some of it aside for emergencies. I invested the rest conservatively and let it compound. But I didn't let it change my life. I think, in some way, I was refusing to let my father's death actually matter. If the money didn't change anything, then the money wasn't real, and if the money wasn't real, Then the statement my father had made with his will didn't matter either. This was probably not psychologically healthy, but it was what I did. Sarah, meanwhile, was changing. The promotion had changed her. She was more confident, but also more stressed. She was working longer hours. She was talking about the business in a way that suggested it was consuming her. She was, in short, becoming our father. I mentioned this to her once, on a phone call in late 2020. "You're getting ambitious," I said. "You're working all the time." "So?" she said. "So, it's just an observation. You're becoming very focused on climbing." "I'm building something," she said. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" "No," I said. "I don't think it is. I think we're supposed to build something that's meaningful to us, not just something that looks good from the outside." "That's easy for you to say," Sarah said, and there was an edge in her voice. "You inherited $3 million. You don't have to worry about proving anything." "That's not true," I said. "It is, though. I inherited $28 million and a business to run. And yeah, I'm ambitious about it. I'm going to put in the work. I'm going to make it matter." She was right, in a way. I had inherited money that was supposed to liberate me, and instead, I'd used it as a way to disappear. Sarah had inherited success, and she was using it as a springboard to climb higher. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean it as a criticism." "I know," Sarah said. "But I have to go. I have a call." These conversations, they happened less and less as time went on. Sarah was busy. I was content to let her be busy. We fell into the pattern of family that a lot of families fall into, checking in every few months, exchanging updates, maintaining the appearance of connection without actually being connected. March 2020 arrived like an asteroid. COVID-19 shut down the country. Suddenly, the logistics business was not just important, it was essential. People couldn't go to stores, so the stores had to come to them. Supply chains that had been optimized for efficiency suddenly had to be optimized for speed. Every logistics company in America became, overnight, critical infrastructure. Sarah's division at North Shore Capital was suddenly invaluable. The company that she'd been learning to run had become the most important part of the larger company's portfolio. Revenues increased 40% in a single quarter. Client retention became a non-issue because clients had no choice but to rely on logistics companies. Sarah stopped sleeping, basically. She worked around the clock. She managed supply chain disruptions. She dealt with staffing issues related to COVID. She navigated the maze of regulations that suddenly applied to logistics operations. She was, as she said in one of our rare conversations, managing the largest logistics operation in the United States during a global pandemic. It was either the most stressful thing imaginable or the most interesting thing imaginable. Possibly both. For me, the pandemic changed things differently. I was an essential worker, the postal service kept operating. I wore a mask and delivered mail and tried not to get infected. The neighborhood I'd been walking for 9 years was suddenly divided into people who were panicking and people who were prepared and people who weren't taking it seriously. I got sick for 2 weeks. It was not a pleasant experience. I had a fever and a cough and a sense of vertigo that made me scared. But I recovered. Many people didn't. During the lockdown, I had time to think. I had time to sit in my apartment and consider my life and ask myself whether I was actually happy or just comfortable. The answer, I think, was both. I was happy because I was comfortable. And I was comfortable because I'd spent 9 years building a life that didn't require much of me and didn't demand much of anyone else. Sarah, by contrast, was miserable and exhilarated in equal measure. The pandemic was a crisis, and crises were her element. She was solving problems. She was building systems. She was doing the thing that my father had modeled, turning chaos into order through force of will and intelligence. When we talked during the lockdown, which we did more frequently than we had been, I could hear it in her voice. She wasn't complaining exactly, but she was describing a level of stress that seemed almost unbearable. And yet, she was bearing it. She was not just bearing it. She was thriving in it. "I've been working 70-hour weeks," she told me in May 2020. "My team has collapsed into essentials only. We've cut away everything that wasn't absolutely necessary." "That sounds exhausting," I said. "It is," she said. "But it's also clarifying. When everything is stripped away and you're just dealing with the essential operations, you understand what actually matters. Everything else is noise." "That's a very dad thing to say," I said. She laughed, a real laugh, not bitter, just acknowledgement. "Yeah. I'm becoming dad. I'm aware of it." "Is that what you want?" "No," she said. "But I don't know how to not be dad." He built something. He was successful. The way to honor that is to be successful too. Or you could just live your life. "I am living my life," she said. "This is my life. I like my life. I work hard and I achieve things and I matter in my industry. That's my life." I didn't argue with her, but I was sad for her. Not because her life was bad, it wasn't. But because she was running the same race my father had run, and I'd already seen how that race ended. Not with fulfillment but with isolation. Not with peace but with the constant feeling that there was something more to achieve, some higher mountain to climb. But Sarah wasn't asking for my opinion. So I kept it to myself. In October 2020, about 8 months into the pandemic, Sarah called me with news. This news would turn out to be the thread that everything else would unravel from. "I'm investing in real estate," she said. "Okay," I said, not sure why she was telling me this. "I'm starting a real estate fund. It's a personal project, separate from North Shore. I've got investors lined up. We're targeting commercial real estate portfolios in major metros." "That's ambitious," I said. "It's not that ambitious. It's just the next logical step. I have capital. The market is depressed because of the pandemic. If we buy now, hold for 5 to 7 years, we'll make significant returns. Is North Shore okay with you doing this outside of work? They have a conflict of interest policy, but this fund will be logistics adjacent, not directly involved in logistics. So as long as there's no direct overlap, I can do this." "How much money are you talking about?" "I'm putting in 10 million of my own capital. I've got investors committing another 40 million. We're targeting 100 million total portfolio. $30 million of her own money. She was putting a third of her inheritance into this venture, betting on the idea that she could pick better real estate investments than the market could predict." "That's a lot of money," I said. "It is," she agreed. "But it's also a significant opportunity. When the economy recovers, and it will recover, commercial real estate is going to boom." "What if you're wrong?" "Then I lose the money," she said, not dismissive exactly, but matter of fact. Like losing $10 million was just something that could happen, something she'd calculated into her risk matrix. I realized, in that moment, that Sarah and I occupied completely different universes. She had inherited money and immediately turned it into a vehicle for making more money. I had inherited money and spent 9 years doing nothing with it. Her approach seemed more correct. Capitalism rewards the people who put their money to work. It punishes the people who let it sit idle. But I couldn't shake the feeling that her approach would eventually lead to the same place it had led our father, to success measured entirely in currency, to a life that was impressive on paper but empty in person. "Good luck," I said. "Thanks," she said. "I'm going to need it." 2021 was the year when things started to feel normal again. The vaccine rolled out. People returned to offices. The economy boomed. The stock market exploded. Everything that had been suppressed by the pandemic came rushing back like a wave. Sarah's real estate fund was already showing strong returns. The hotels and office buildings and retail spaces she'd bought at pandemic prices were appreciating as the economy reopened. On paper, she'd made significant money. The 40 million of outside capital had turned into 60 million. Her own 10 million investment had grown to 15 million. She sounded different when we talked now, more confident, more sure of herself, more convinced that she'd figured out something that the average person couldn't figure out. "The secret," she told me once, "is to bet against the consensus." Everyone was terrified in 2020. Everyone thought commercial real estate was dying. But I knew it would come back. I just had to believe in the recovery. "You're going to make a lot of money," I said. "Yeah," she said. "I think I am." For me, 2021 was quiet. I worked. I lived in my apartment. I had a relationship with someone named Jessica that lasted about 4 months before it became clear that we wanted different things. She wanted more of me, more of my time, more of my attention. I couldn't give her that because I was too focused on not wanting anything for myself. We broke up amicably. I kept my life exactly the way it was. And in the way that time moves when you're not making significant changes, 2021 became 2022 became 2023. Sarah's real estate portfolio continued to appreciate. By 2023, her original 10 million investment had grown to 30 million. She was managing a portfolio worth $300 million. She was considering raising a second fund. She was being written about in real estate industry publications. I remember reading an article about her in Commercial Real Estate News. It was a profile of young real estate investors during the post-pandemic boom. Sarah was featured prominently, described as a rising star in the real estate investment space, known for her contrarian approach and her ability to identify value in depressed markets. The article included a quote from her: "Most people invest based on fear or greed. The key is to invest based on actual analysis. Understand the fundamentals. Understand the long-term trends. Then bet on the fundamentals, regardless of the short-term sentiment." I recognized this philosophy. It was my father's philosophy, translated into real estate terms. I sent her a link to the article. She responded with a single word: "Thanks." We were connected but disconnected. We were family but strangers. We had inherited the same losses but processed them into completely different lives. It was November 2023 when Sarah called me with the news. It was a Thursday evening. I was cooking dinner, pasta with a red sauce, nothing special. The phone rang and I thought about not answering it. I had a sense, the way you sometimes do, that this call was going to be important in a way that I didn't want to be important. But I answered it anyway. "Hi," Sarah said. "Do you have time to talk?" "A little. I'm cooking. It'll take 5 minutes." "Okay," I said, turning off the stove. "I'm making an investment," she said. "In Columbus. It's a commercial real estate project, and I wanted to talk to you about it first." Why would you need to talk to me? Because the property is an apartment building. Your apartment building, actually. I sat down. What? The building where you live, she said. I've been working with the current owner. He's looking to sell. It's a beautiful property, great bones, fully occupied, steady cash flow. I want to acquire it. For your real estate fund? I asked. Yes. For the fund. It's exactly the kind of property we look for: solid fundamentals, value-add potential, located in a neighborhood that's going to appreciate. Okay, I said slowly. And I wanted to tell you because you live there, and I thought it was important that you knew what was happening before it happened. So you're going to buy my building? Yes, she said. I'm going to buy your building. What happens to me? To my apartment? What do you mean? Do I keep living there? Do I have to move? There was a pause on the line. Long enough that I knew she was about to say something difficult. I'm planning to acquire the entire building, she said. So I'm going to own it completely. I'm going to renovate it. Probably convert it into a mixed-use development. Office on the ground floor. Residential on the upper floors. So I'd have to move. Possibly. I haven't figured out the exact timeline yet. I understood, in that moment, what was happening. My sister was going to buy the building I lived in and convert it into something more profitable. And I would have to find somewhere else to live, because my living there did not maximize the return on her investment. When? I asked. When would you need to move? I don't know yet. Months probably. I need to finalize the acquisition, close on the property, figure out the renovation plan. This is my home, I said. The words surprised me. I hadn't known I felt that way until I heard myself say them. I understand, Sarah said. But it's also just a building. You can find somewhere else to live. I've lived there for 12 years, I said. I know, she said. But you don't own it, so you don't have any real claim to stay there. You have a lease, and we can buy out that lease. We. As if this was already something that had been decided, that I was just being notified about rather than consulted on. I don't want you to buy my building, I said. I understand that, Sarah said. But I'm going to buy it anyway. Why? Because it's a good investment. Because it has value-add potential. Because I can afford to. So because you can, you do. That's how business works, Marcus. This isn't business, I said. This is my life. Your life is in a building that you don't own. That's not actually your life. That's just where you happen to be living. I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't think of an argument that made sense in the vocabulary she was using. In her vocabulary, everything was business. Everything was investment. Everything was return on capital. When will you know for sure? I asked. When will you know if you're buying the building? Soon. Probably within the month. I wanted to tell you before it became official. Thanks for the heads up, I said. I mean it, Marcus. I wanted you to hear this from me, not from the owner or a lawyer. Okay, I said. Well, you told me. Are you angry? I don't know. Surprised, maybe. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said. I'm just doing business. I know, I said. That's what makes it worse. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked around my apartment. I looked at the hardwood floors that I'd chosen. I looked at the light that came through the windows at different times of day. I looked at the space where I'd built a life that had made sense to me, that had been enough. And I understood that none of it mattered. It was just space. Space that someone else could buy and convert and make into something more profitable. Over the next 2 weeks, I didn't hear from Sarah. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. We existed in a state of suspended communication, both of us processing the conversation, both of us waiting to see what would happen next. Then, on a Thursday evening exactly 2 weeks after her call, Sarah showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting her. I would have seen if she'd called, would have arranged to meet somewhere neutral. But she just showed up, like she had been doing since we were kids, like the normal rules of friendship or relationship didn't apply to siblings. I opened the door and she was standing there in a black blazer and black pants, looking very much like a woman on her way to or from an important meeting. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. "Come in." She came in and looked around the apartment like she was appraising it for renovation potential. Which, of course, she was. "It's a nice space," she said. "It's home," I said. "It could be so much more," she said. "If it was mixed use. If we opened this unit into the one next door. If we put in a proper kitchen. It could be really special." "It is special," I said. "To me. Because I live here." She sat down on the couch. She didn't take off her blazer. She looked like she was going to conduct a business meeting, which, I realized, she was. "The acquisition is finalized," she said. "I closed on the building 2 days ago. You're now technically renting from me." I sat down across from her. "Congratulations. There's more," she said. "My team has begun the renovation planning. The timeline is aggressive. I need to clear the building within 6 months. I need all the current residents to vacate. All of them. Yes. I'm offering buyout packages to anyone who's willing to leave early. For you, I'm offering $100,000 to break your lease and relocate." She said this like it was a generous offer. Like $100,000 was a fortune, was compensation for losing your home. "That's not enough money," I said. "It's more than enough," Sarah said. "You can find a new place. You can use the money as a down payment on a house if you want. You can invest it. You can do whatever you want with it. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" I realized, looking at my sister, that I didn't know how to explain the point to her. The point was that I had built a life here and she was destroying it for profit. The point was that I didn't want to leave. The point was that she had already inherited $30 million and it apparently wasn't enough, she needed my apartment too. But I couldn't explain any of that in a way that would matter to her. She had learned, probably from our father, that everything could be priced. And if everything could be priced, then everything could be bought, and if everything could be bought, then everything was just a transaction waiting to happen. "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm not taking your money. I'm staying." Sarah's face went very still. "You're under a lease," she said carefully. "I can legally terminate the lease." "I don't care. You have to care. You don't have a choice." "I do have a choice," I said. "I can refuse. I can make this difficult for you. You'd sue me. If I have to." Sarah stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below, at Columbus in November, at the city that she had left and I had stayed in. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. I think you're someone who was designed to want more and more and more, and that design is going to keep you from ever being happy." "I'm happy," she said. "No, you're not. You're successful. You're driven. You're climbing. But you're not happy. And you are. Living in this apartment, delivering mail, staying exactly where you've always been?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." She turned to look at me. That's sad, she said. That's peaceful, I said. She picked up her bag. I'm going to give you 60 days, she said. If you haven't moved out by January 15th, I'm evicting you. Then evict me, I said. She left. She didn't say goodbye. She just left, walking out of my apartment and my life in the way that she'd learned to do efficiently, without wasting time on sentiment or emotion. The next 2 months were strange. I continued living in the apartment. I continued going to work. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't look for a new place to live. I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Waiting for Sarah to back down. Waiting for her to call and say she was sorry. Waiting for some version of this story that made more sense. It didn't come. In January, I received a legal notice. Sarah was initiating eviction proceedings. The notice was very professional, very formal. It was signed by lawyers. It didn't have Sarah's personal touch. It was the bureaucratic version of what she'd threatened. I called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. Don't do this, I said. I've already done it, she said. You could take it back. You could call the lawyers and stop it. Why would I do that? Because I'm your brother. I know, she said. And I respect that. But this isn't about you and me. This is about business. This is about the renovation timeline. It's always about business with you, I said. Yes, she said. It is. Because business is how you matter in the world. Business is how you build something that lasts. What about family? What about relationships? Those are secondary, she said. That's what I learned from Dad. The thing that matters is what you build. The thing that matters is the legacy you leave. That's not healthy, I said. Maybe not. But it's effective. I hung up. I didn't call her back. I hired a lawyer not to fight the eviction, but to make sure I understood my rights. The lawyer was a man named Harrison who specialized in tenant law. He sat across from me in his office and explained that I didn't have much of a case. The lease can be terminated with proper notice, he said. Your landlord has given notice. Even if this seems vindictive, which, frankly, I think it might be, legally she has the right to terminate the lease and evict you. So I just have to leave. You have options, Harrison said. You could move and make her go through the full eviction process, which would take time and cost her money in legal fees. But that just delays things. Eventually, you'd have to leave anyway. So I'm trapped. No, Harrison said. You're just in a situation where you don't have legal recourse. But you have personal agency. You can choose to leave. You can minimize the conflict. She offered me $100,000. And I don't want her money. Why not? I realized I couldn't articulate this in a way that made sense. If I took the money, it would feel like I was accepting her terms, accepting that everything could be priced and bought. But if I didn't take the money, I was just making the situation harder on myself for the sake of a principle that nobody else would understand or care about. Because it's the principle of the thing, I said. Principles are expensive, Harrison said. They cost you money, they cost you time, they cost you peace of mind. Are you sure this principle is worth the price? I didn't answer him. But I knew that he was right. The principle wasn't worth the price. But I was going to pay it anyway, because that's what happens when you're tired of being moved around by people who love money more than they love you. I didn't move. I stayed in the apartment through the legal process. The eviction hearing was scheduled for February 15th. I showed up with my lawyer. Sarah didn't show up personally. She sent a lawyer, a woman named Prescott, who worked for a firm that specialized in real estate litigation. Ms. Prescott presented the case. It was dry, factual, unemotional. My lease had been terminated with proper legal notice. The landlord was exercising her right to regain possession of the property for renovation and redevelopment. I was a residential tenant with no legal claim to remain in the property. The judge agreed. He ruled in favor of Sarah. He gave me 30 days to vacate. "I'll file an appeal," Harrison said afterward. "But you should start looking for a place to live. This will probably hold." I didn't file an appeal. I didn't look for a place. Instead, I called Sarah. "You won," I said. "I didn't want to win," she said. "I wanted you to move voluntarily." "No, you wanted me gone. You got me gone. Congratulations." "Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you," I said. "I hate you right now. I don't think I've ever said that before. But I'm saying it now. I hate what you're doing. I hate that you inherited $28 million and that apparently wasn't enough. I hate that you wanted my apartment more than you wanted to be my sister." "It wasn't about the apartment," Sarah said. "It was never about the apartment." "What was it about, then?" "It was about proving that I could do it. That I could build a real estate portfolio from nothing. That I could outperform the market. That I could be successful." "You've already proven all of that," I said. "You don't need to destroy my life to prove it again." "I didn't destroy your life. You lived there. You can live somewhere else." "It's the same thing," I said. "You took something I cared about and turned it into money. That's destruction." "That's business," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I know. That's the problem." I hung up and didn't call her back. I didn't answer when she called. I just went about the process of finding a new place to live, understanding that this was the end of something, not just my time in that apartment, but something bigger. Something about being part of a family that valued money more than people. I found a new apartment. It was smaller, in a less desirable neighborhood. The rent was cheaper. I moved in the first week of March 2024, exactly 15 years after I'd signed the lease on the previous place. As I was boxing up my things, I made a decision. I was going to take the money that I'd inherited from my father. I was going to use it to buy something that couldn't be taken from me, that couldn't be developed into something more profitable. I was going to buy my own place, and I was going to own it completely. I called a real estate agent. I started looking at properties. With $3.2 million, I could afford something significant. Something that would hold value. Something that was mine in a way that an apartment in a building owned by my sister never would be. It took me 3 months to find the right place. It was a house, built in 1995, 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, located in a neighborhood that was stable but not trendy. It was the kind of house that would never be impressive at a dinner party. It would never make anyone want to know more about me. It was just a good place to live. I bought it for $280,000. I paid cash. I own it completely. I have a mortgage-free life in a house that has nothing to do with my sister, nothing to do with my father, nothing to do with the family I came from. When I signed the deed, I felt something release in my chest. A weight I'd been carrying since my father died, maybe since before that. I was free, finally, to just be myself, to not be defined by who my family was or what they'd achieved or how they'd valued me. 5 years have passed since I bought the house. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for grief to fade. Long enough for anger to become something closer to understanding. long enough for the sharp edges of events to soften into the landscape of a normal life. I haven't spoken to Sarah in those 5 years. Not once. We exist in a state of non-communication that is somehow more powerful than if we were actively fighting. When we don't speak, we can both maintain our versions of what happened. When we don't speak, there's no opportunity for reconciliation or understanding, which means there's also no opportunity for further hurt. From what I can gather, through the various channels that information travels, mutual acquaintances, social media, the rare news article about her real estate ventures, Sarah's empire has had ups and downs. In 2024, her real estate portfolio was performing well. She'd raised a second fund, much larger than the first. She was managing more than $500 million in assets. She was on the cover of several real estate industry publications. She was, by all external measures, very successful. But then, in 2025, something shifted. The real estate market began to cool. The post-pandemic boom that she'd bet on so aggressively started to reverse. Commercial real estate, which had been her specialty, was hit particularly hard as companies moved to hybrid work models and didn't need as much office space. By 2026, her fund was struggling. The hotels that had appreciated so dramatically were suddenly depreciating. The office buildings that had been so valuable were facing vacancy issues. The fundamental thesis that had driven her investments, that commercial real estate would boom as the world reopened, turned out to be wrong. I read about this in a news article. I don't know if Sarah's fund actually collapsed or if it just stumbled. But I know that something changed. I know that the empire she'd been building with such certainty and such drive started to crumble. I felt sad when I read that. Not happy. Not vindicated. Just sad that she'd invested so much of herself in something that turned out to be fragile. Meanwhile, I've built a different kind of life. I still work for the postal service. I still deliver mail. I still know the names of the people on my route. The neighborhood where I work is the same neighborhood where I live now. It's this continuity, this sense of knowing a place and being known by a place, that matters to me. I date occasionally. I had a relationship with someone named Amy that lasted 2 years. We broke up because, ultimately, she wanted more of me than I was willing to give. I'm not good at partnership. I'm good at solitude. I like my own company. I like the quiet of my life. I still have the $3.2 million, or a version of it. I've spent less than $300,000 on the house. The rest has been invested conservatively. It's compounding. It's growing. But I don't pay attention to it. I don't let it influence my decisions. I let it sit in the background of my life like a safety net. Every year, I donate some of it to charity. I give to organizations that help homeless people. I give to organizations that provide mental health services. I give to organizations that work on climate change. I don't make a big deal of it. I just transfer money from my account to theirs and try to do it in a way that honors the life my mother lived, quietly, generously, without expecting recognition. Sometimes I think about having a conversation with Sarah. Sometimes I draft the conversation in my head. I imagine what I'd say, what she'd say, how we'd move toward reconciliation. But I never actually call. The gap has become too wide. The hurt has been too complete. Or maybe I'm just too proud. Maybe I'm holding on to this grudge because it's the one thing that feels like it belongs to me, that Sarah didn't buy or control or turn into an asset. It's July now. It's Thursday evening. I'm sitting on the porch of my house, looking out at the street. My neighbors wave sometimes when they drive by. I wave back. I know most of them. I've lived here long enough to know people. A lot has happened in the 5 years since Sarah and I stopped speaking. My father's company, the one that he built, the one he left to Sarah, no longer exists. North Shore Capital sold it off. The division that Sarah managed was integrated into a larger operation and then divested when the market turned. It's gone. It's as if those 34 years of my father's life, that company that was the center of everything, just ceased to exist. Sarah is still working. I don't know what she's doing exactly. The last I heard, she was involved in some kind of investment restructuring. Trying to salvage something from the collapse of her real estate fund. Still climbing, I imagine. Still trying to prove something. I got a letter from a lawyer last month. It was from Sarah's lawyer. The letter explained that Sarah had created a trust. She had set aside money for me, $5 million. The letter said that she was doing this because she regretted what had happened between us, because she wanted to ensure that I had financial security, because she still loved me despite everything. I didn't open the rest of the letter. I put it in a drawer. The $5 million is still sitting in an account somewhere. I haven't touched it. I haven't called to discuss it. I haven't acknowledged that Sarah tried to reach me through the medium of money, which is apparently the only language we have in common. The question that I've been wrestling with for 5 years, the question that I asked at the end of that initial call with Sarah, the question that I've been asking myself ever since, is still unanswered. When someone offers you money to disappear, how much is it worth not to? And the answer, I'm learning, depends on what you believe your life is worth. It depends on whether you think that value can be measured in currency. It depends on whether you're willing to let someone else's economics become your definition of self-worth. For me, the answer is that it's worth everything. It's worth refusing $100,000. It's worth refusing $5 million. It's worth refusing the inheritance that my sister tried to give me out of guilt or shame or whatever emotion motivated that gesture. Because if I accept money from Sarah, then I'm accepting her version of how the world works. I'm accepting that everything can be priced. I'm accepting that relationships are transactions. I'm accepting that blood doesn't matter more than balance sheets. And I'm not willing to accept that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being noble or just stubborn. Sometimes I wonder if I'm honoring my own values or just being vindictive in a passive-aggressive way. Sometimes I wonder if refusing Sarah's money is actually about principle or if it's just a way of punishing her for what she did. The truth is, I don't know. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think I can be all of those things at once, noble and stubborn, principled and petty, honorable and hurt. What I do know is this: I had a choice. I could have moved out when Sarah asked. I could have taken her money. I could have reshaped my life according to her timeline and her needs. I could have made things easy for her. But I didn't. I said no. And that no meant something to me, even if it didn't mean anything to her. My father built an empire and forgot to build a family. Sarah inherited that empire and the lesson that had created it, that success was more important than connection, that business was more important than blood, that climbing was more important than standing still. I inherited something different. I inherited a warning. I inherited a roadmap of what not to do. I'm not rich the way my sister is rich. But I'm not broken the way my father was broken. I'm not climbing toward something that will never be high enough, never be good enough, never fill the void that comes from valuing your own achievement more than your own relationships. I have a quiet life. I have a modest house. I have work that means something because it connects me to other people. I have solitude that means something because it's mine. There's something I've been waiting for, I think. All these years. I've been waiting for Sarah to call and say that she was sorry. I've been waiting for her to say that she made a mistake. I've been waiting for her to say that I mattered more than money. But that call hasn't come. And I'm starting to understand that it probably won't come. Sarah isn't wired for that kind of introspection. She's not designed to question her choices. She's designed to make choices and then defend those choices until the end of time. So the reconciliation that I thought might happen, the moment when we could look back and laugh about how ridiculous this whole thing was, that moment isn't going to come. And I've had to make peace with that. I've had to accept that my sister and I are going to grow old without really knowing each other, without really connecting, without being able to reference the same family history in the same way. That's sad. I think it's genuinely sad. But it's also just how it is. So here's what I've learned over the 5 years since my sister threw me out of my apartment. When someone offers you money to disappear, they're not actually offering you money. They're offering you a choice: become smaller so they can be bigger, or stay exactly the size you are and accept the consequences. Most people take the money. Most people accept the premise that money can solve any problem, that currency can compensate for any damage, that some number of dollars is the equivalent of a human being's sense of home. But some people, some of us, look at that money and say no. Not because we don't want money, not because we're noble or pure or superior, but because we understand, on some fundamental level, that our value can't be calculated by anyone else. Our worth isn't negotiable. Our lives aren't commodities. When my sister offered me $100,000 to leave my apartment, she was offering me a transaction. When she offered me $5 million through a lawyer, she was offering me redemption on her terms. Both times, she was saying, "Here is the price I've calculated for the damage I've done. Here is what I think your life is worth." And both times, I said no. Not because the math was wrong, but because I refused to accept the premise that there was a number that could make this okay. Because there isn't. There's no amount of money that makes it okay to treat your sibling like a business problem. There's no investment return that justifies destroying the life someone else has built. There's no real estate portfolio in the world that's worth more than the relationship between two people who shared a mother and a father and a childhood and a grief. I'm 48 years old now. I've lived this life long enough to know that I'm not going to be successful in the way my father was successful, in the way my sister became successful. I'm not going to build an empire. I'm not going to be featured in industry publications. I'm not going to achieve the kind of external validation that my family seemed to believe was the only currency that mattered. But I'm also not going to spend my entire life climbing toward something that will never be high enough. I'm not going to let money become my sole measure of self-worth. I'm not going to treat my relationships like business transactions. So here's my question for you, the person listening to this story. How many times have you accepted less of yourself to make someone else more comfortable? How many times have you been offered money, literally or figuratively, to disappear, to be smaller, to recalibrate your own needs around someone else's desires? How many times have you said yes when you should have said no? And most importantly, what would it feel like to say no? What would it feel like to refuse to be priced? What would it feel like to stand exactly where you are and say, "This is me, this is my value, this is non-negotiable"? That's the question I've been living with for 5 years. That's the question I asked myself when Sarah threatened to evict me. That's the question I asked myself when she offered me money to leave. And the answer I came to was, the most valuable thing I own isn't my house, isn't my job, isn't my inherited wealth. The most valuable thing I own is the knowledge that I'm worth more than any number anyone can put on me. That's what my sister never learned. That's what my father never learned. And that's what I'm trying to teach myself, every day, in the quiet of my house, in the routine of my work, in the solitude of my life. I'm worth more than money. And so are you. It's been 5 years since my sister offered to pay me to disappear. It's been 5 years since I said no. It's been 5 years since we stopped speaking to each other. I don't know if she still thinks about me. I don't know if she regrets what she did. I don't know if the $5 million she set aside for me is still sitting in an account somewhere, or if she's given up on the idea of buying her way back into my life. What I do know is this: I made a choice. I chose my self-respect over her money. I chose my principle over her offer. And I've never regretted that choice. Will I ever talk to my sister again? I don't know. Maybe. Time has a way of changing things. People have a way of changing. Maybe Sarah will come to understand what she did. Maybe she'll reach out in a way that doesn't involve money. Maybe we'll find our way back to each other. But I'm not waiting for that. I'm not holding my breath. I'm just living my life, quietly, in the house that I own, in the neighborhood that I know, doing work that means something because it connects me to other people. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.